Hello, and welcome to our podcast we're calling The Production Flow of Movies. We want to talk to you a little bit about how many movies are made from start to finish so that we can get a greater appreciation of all the work that goes into making these. So as we begin studying them this semester, we are better able to understand the nuances of them, but also to appreciate where these things have come from. Because you'll hear us say this over and over in class, pretty much everything in a movie is intentional. It doesn't just happen, because this is a big money expenditure in the hopes of making a lot of money, in addition to entertaining a lot of people. And so you got to do some planning to make these things. You don't just pull out your camera one day and say, let's make Jaws or Avatar or something like that. So we just wanted to expose you to some of the things that go on behind the scenes that you may not be familiar with in ultimately making some of our favorite movies. So first thing we have to do is come up with an idea for a movie. Where or who provides this idea? Many films are created from an absolutely original idea. They are just the brainchild of somebody who says, I want to tell this story, and I want to tell it through film. And then they craft a script, and then they get actors, and they kind of go from there along that route. Another common way that movies are formed comes from adaptation. And we'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit more in a little while. So if we have some sort of original idea, we're probably going to take that idea and then write what's called a film treatment. This is a couple-page summary of the idea and the major plot points in this potential film, and the goal of this is to sell that movie. As a writer or as a director, I probably don't have the millions of dollars just ready access in my pocket that are needed to bankroll this entire production. So I have to sell it to somebody else who's going to help put up the money that we can then make it, create the movie, sell it, market it, that kind of stuff, and then start making money back as people go to watch it. And so as we are making this in 2013, the Academy Awards are coming up tonight, and you can see that some of the films that are nominated for a lot of awards, such as Flight, Django Unchained, and Zero Dark 30, these did come from original stories. Now, some of them, such as Zero Dark 30, they were based on historical events, but then somebody took the idea and said, how do we take this finding and killing of bin Laden and put it on screen? Somebody had to put words to that, crafting the ideas, crafting the visual imagery. And so we would consider these original ideas. And so we think of this, and then we craft that film treatment, and then we kind of go from there. Now, a lot of movies, and probably a greater percentage than we are even aware of, come from that other avenue that we talked about before, which is called adaptation. And this is the idea of taking existing material and transforming it into a movie. And so this does become a new genre. You're taking the written word of, say, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, and you're changing it into the movie of To Kill a Mockingbird. So the Harry Potter series, another very famous one that was taken from the books and then transferred almost immediately into film. But probably 50, 60, maybe 70% of most movies that are out there today have come from previously released material in the form of poems, short stories, novels, plays, things like that somebody has said, hey, let's put this into a new medium, let's put this into film. And so this is just kind of another way that the ideas go from, somebody's brain to the big screen. Eventually, we're going to have to finance this project. And so as you are watching a lot of films, you will see production company studio names come across the screen. These are all the different people and groups and companies that have added money into making of this film. We have the big studios like Warner Brothers, Fox, or Universal. They're very famous, very long running. They've been doing this for a long, long time. They used to have their own kind of studio corral of people that Universal would just put out film after film using the same actors, tweaking the story slightly, but they would just bankroll everything and then take all the money right away. That has changed a lot in the last couple of years or decade, where we have more and more people adding in to the filmmaking process because it's exceptionally expensive. We also have the route of independent studios, such as maybe Fox Searchlight or the Weinstein Company, where these people are bankrolling and putting in money to the making of these films, but they might be looking for a different type of film than, say, Universal is. Fox Searchlight is going to be looking for smaller budget movies, maybe niche films, not the summer blockbusters that they know are going to be making bazillions of dollars, but something a little bit more quirky, off the beaten track, different directors, different producers, things like that, to kind of propose and move forward different stories that their particular studio likes to support. And just to get a flavor of how much some of these things cost, the latest Pirates of the Caribbean, the At World's End version, cost $300 million to make a couple years ago. Avatar, $270 million. And The Dark Knight Rises more recently at $250 million to make. So you could see why somebody having an idea of, hey, I want to take this comic book and put it on screen, probably isn't going to have the money completely by themselves. They're going to have to go to the studios, go to other investors, collect the money, sell them on a great story, on a great set of potential sequels, and all kinds of other marketing things that we'll talk about down the road. But these are exceptionally expensive. On the flip side, movies can be made for relatively cheap also. Now, some of these you may have seen. Super Size Me, $65,000. First Saw movie, $1.2 million, and Napoleon Dynamite, $400,000. All of these relatively successful at the box office. A lot of people went to go watch them. They made a ton of money because they didn't cost very much to make. But please think about this. Anybody can be making a movie. With the advent of cell phone cameras and cheap flip cameras and things like that, why couldn't you go out and just make your own? Now, it's probably harder to make some sort of feature film, that's set in space and all kinds of special effects and things like that, because that's going to cost a lot. But why not make a documentary on something? Follow the life of an average student at a school. Follow the life of your dentist or your veterinarian or something like that. Just take a camera along, videotape what they do, take it into some sort of editing program, make yourself a movie. You could do it for probably cheaper than you think. Is it going to achieve the same success as a Napoleon Dynamite? Hard to say. Maybe it does. But you can see the wide variety of budgets that movies are using out there. Now, there's always debate over what is the most profitable movie ever, because we have to adjust for inflation and ticket prices and expenditures and all kinds of things based on when the film was made. Gone with the Wind, made a long time ago, made a certain amount of money. Would that stand up if we adjusted for inflation and cost of living and that kind of stuff? But oftentimes, people go back to the movie Paranormal Activity that was made, they say, for $15,000, which is pretty darn cheap. Granted, it's a lot of just cameras looking into empty rooms and nothing happening, and that's pretty cheap to make. But then they say that movie made almost $197 million of people going to the theater, people buying it on DVD. And so if you can do the math there, you could see that most everything they made was pure profit. And so whether you have some sort of original idea or you're going to adapt something from a previously written text, you have to create a script. And this is going to go through drafts and revisions and final drafts and all kinds of shooting scripts and intermediate steps if we think this is going to work. And then, oh, wait, an investor needs to see this in there. So you have to go back and draft and fix it and revise it and stuff like that. So a couple years ago, we had the pleasure of having director, writer, producer, editor, everything guy, Derek Cianfrance, come into our film class to talk about his own development of the movie Blue Valentine with Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams. And he was saying that it took him years and years to craft that script. And he just kept chipping away at it and fixing it and fine-tuning it and adding and taking out and that kind of stuff. And then oftentimes he said that some of the actors would just ad-lib stuff. And they would use that in the script. And just that made the final cut of the film. So it's not like somebody just sits down and crafts a script in 10 minutes or 2 hours or maybe even over 6 months. I mean, some people would. That's how they write. Other stories are going to take longer to develop, are going to need more support, and going to need more input, are going to need for society to be ready for them, that kind of stuff. And so we got to go from I have an idea to now I've written a script, and then we have to go forward in this process. And so this is the next step in that process is what we call pre-production. So this is before we are actually filming anything. We have to take that written script, which is still just written, and we have to decide how are we going to bring this to visual life, where film is a different medium than writing. So who are we going to cast? Who do you think would fit the role of Atticus Finch or of Harry Potter? Is it going to be some big name, somebody you've never seen before, a child actor, some veteran? Like, what are you going to do? Who are you going to get in there? Who would you want to work with? Some people are nicer to work with than others. Some of these stars, very accommodating. They'll do whatever you want them to do. Many of them, not so much. And so if you're not doing what they want, they're not going to get involved. You got to think about this with your budgeting. Who can you afford? And additionally, who's able? What if you really want this person, but they're already committed to making another movie at this time? Do you put your own movie on hold and to wait for them? Or do you say, well, you know what, I can't go with Michelle Williams, so I'm going to go after Angelina Jolie or something like that. Maybe that would change the flavor of the movie in terms of what they look like and how they act and what they do. But we have to decide who's going to be there on film for us. Eventually, we're going to have to start storyboarding. And this is taking that script and making those first steps into the visualization process. Because again, we have to make this visual. We don't just want to go out there and say, all right, well, scene 1, I need you guys to say these 5 things, and we're just going to put 20 cameras on you and a bunch of lights, and we'll just do it on our backyard. Go. That's exceptionally expensive. You're paying all these people to run the cameras, the lights, the special effects, all this kind of stuff. You got to make sure that you've done some planning. And so oftentimes people will start storyboarding where they do some direct planning and say, okay, this is how I want this written scene to go. I want it shot from these angles. I want this kind of motion. I want this kind of shot on there. That's what I'm aiming for. Because you got to plan all the lighting, the special effects, shooting schedule. What about weather? What if all of a sudden, you're expecting snow for some sort of snow-based thing and you don't have snow that season? Do you change locations, move from Colorado to Utah? Or do you put the whole thing on hold for a year? Or do you ship in snow? I heard something on NPR the other day, and they're talking about the set decorator's job. And they were out there for a movie taking autumn-colored leaves and wiring them to wintered trees. So all the leaves had fallen off, but they needed to shoot here, and they needed it to be autumn. So they are out there crafting fall-looking trees by wiring on fake leaves. Tons of choices. You better do some planning if you're going to commit your money and way more other people's money to a process like this. Once you get going and you start shooting, we call this the production period, and you're going to start filming. I would say that most films probably aren't shot in chronological order. The things that you'll see on screen, A to B to C, are probably not shot in that order for a variety of reasons. And think about this. What if we have to have characters age or gain weight, or vice versa? How do we do that? Availability of actors? What if we need to wrap this production within the next 3 weeks because somebody is pregnant and all of a sudden in 3 weeks they're really going to be showing? And so do we shoot around that baby bump? Do we get a different actor from the beginning? What do we do? But once we start going, we have to be relatively efficient, or this thing could drag on forever. A story that Cian France told us about Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams in the movie Blue Valentine was that they did have to age. He had to show them at the youth of their love affair and then as their marriage was falling apart. So he wanted them to fundamentally look different. And so one idea of his was to film the young, youthful love part and then come back to them 5 or 6 years later and just see how they've naturally aged. Well, the production companies weren't too keen on that. The people with the money weren't going to wait. So they're like, okay, we've got to figure out a way to make these actors gain weight, look older, more gray hair, more haggard. Some of that is just through hair and makeup, costuming, things like that. But the other part that the actors took on themselves, he said, was that they basically made a little contest to see who could gain the most weight the fastest. And so it started off that Michelle Williams and Ryan Gosling were just eating a ton of ice cream. And then they didn't feel like they were gaining it fast enough, and they were challenging each other. Who could gain the most weight the fastest? And so they actually started, he said, drinking coconut ice cream. They would take a gallon of it and melt it in the microwave and just start chugging it. Well, that's pretty high fat stuff. And so, as these guys were drinking this over the days and weeks, they started to gain weight and they started to look more like the director wanted, which was more years into their relationship that's winding down, more towards a divorce end, that kind of stuff.